Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these very critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. As we record this podcast, Prime Minister Mark Carney is going up the steps of the White House to meet with President Donald Trump to talk about trade. In anticipation of this meeting, opposition leader and leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Pierre Poilievre, wrote, I guess you call this an open letter to the Prime Minister, at least he published it anyway, with his take on what should be happening and Poilievre's perspective on this whole thing. And it's typical Poilievre, of course, very acerbic, full of innuendos and half information and sometimes misinformation. You know, this guy is trying so very hard to try to show Canadians that he's relevant in this discussion. And it's just not working. I mean, you're not a player here, Mr. Poilievre, but he's trying to be. And the media, of course, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, simply reprints everything or says whatever he says. And, you know, so he's getting all the media attention he wants because nobody seems to want to fact check him. Well, you know, we're going to do a little fact checking on the podcast today about the letter. So I want to go through the letter, first of all. Watch the screen here and we'll go through some of the text of Mr. Poilievre. This is the title of it here. It's called Go to Washington and Negotiate a Win for Canada. A very novel approach. I don't know who wrote this for him. Anyway, conservatives are cheering, he says, for Carney to be successful. So let's go down to the beginning of the letter. It says, Prime Minister, conservatives will always put Canada first. We restate our standing offer to help you keep your promise to negotiate a win on tariffs with the U.S. I would suggest that they're not always showing that they're putting Canada first. I think Poilievre puts Poilievre first with some of the remarks that he's made, but we'll get back to that. The letter goes on. We only ask that you keep your promise in this meeting with the President. You promised a deal by July 21st, 2025. Still no deal. You promised to negotiate a win. And now U.S. tariffs on Canada are twice as high as when you were elected, saying that you would get rid of them. You promised elbows up, but then caved on dollar-for-dollar counter tariffs, the digital service tax, and more, while winning nothing in return for Canada. Well, let's put this in perspective. The promise for a deal by July 21st, 2025, of course, came from a meeting with Trump that happened in May, and it was Trump that boasted about getting this thing done, and Carney, I thought, was optimistic, but certainly didn't carve that in stone. The whole idea about capitulating here, which is something that Poilievre has really jumped on here for the last little while. We caved on dollar-for-dollar counter tariffs and digital service tax and getting nothing. Well, here's what's happened, okay? Just let me refresh the history here because Poilievre seems to want to skirt over this. What we did and what happened as a result of those counter tariffs being lifted, we got the United States back to the table. They walked away. Do you remember that? They walked away. They said there was no sense in negotiating because we weren't making any progress. In other words, they didn't like what Canada was doing. We were one of the only major countries to actually issue counter tariffs, and that really stuck in Trump's you-know-what. The only way to get them back to the table was to do this. So, Mr. Poilievre, you're wrong. There would be negotiations, no negotiations. Mr. LeBlanc and his team would be sitting there with nobody across the desk from them if we'd not done this. And besides, there's an argument to be made for it also that the digital service tax and other things like that were not very popular and may not even have survived this government. So be that as it might. Let me get back to the letter. Poilievre goes on to write. He says, you promised jobs, then killed 86,000 of them. You promised the fastest growing economy in the G7 and delivered the fastest shrinking economy in the G7. Canadians suffering in your weak economy have no more time for you to bask in the globe-trotting photo ops, handshakes, and press conferences. Now he's referring back to something that he thought was pretty cute that he was saying about that this is nothing more than a public relations tour. Let me put this in perspective. There have been job losses here in this country and in most other countries because of the economic circumstance globally. But the job losses were caused by tariffs, not by Prime Minister's policies, not by the government's policy, tariffs. And the chief public officers in just about every one of the provinces that have suffered job losses, including Alberta and Ontario, lay it squarely at the feet of the tariffs. And that's not us. That's the United States government, okay? The Prime Minister did not close down auto plants. He did not cut shifts at auto plants. That's as a result of tariffs. And that's what the whole discussion is about. The other element of this, and I got to touch on this because it's so way off base here. He goes on to say that Carney's trips across to Europe and other Asia and other places are nothing but globe-trotting photo ops. I referenced this in a previous podcast. It was a Spark survey that was done by Bruce Anderson and the folks at Spark Surveys about what was going on with this. And 72% of the people in that survey agree that Carney's doing the right thing. They say it's absolutely essential for the Prime Minister to go to these countries and begin negotiations to either start new trade deals or to enhance existing trade deals. You know, we want to talk about diversifying the economy and diversifying our trade. And I think we're all on the same page about that, aren't we, Mr. Poilievre? Well, maybe not all of us, Mr. Poilievre. Well, how do you expect to do that? The only way to do that diversification is to go and talk to the other leaders. It just really and truly shows that Poilievre just doesn't seem to have a handle on what's going on here. And it just reminds me of how scary it would be if this is a guy in the corner office trying to negotiate these deals. He just doesn't get it. He doesn't know how businesses work. Carney is doing absolutely the right thing, and the overwhelming majority of Canadians agree with that. And by the way, let's keep this in perspective, too. We are talking about Canada-U.S. relations vis-a-vis tariffs, etc., obviously, because it's in our interest to do that. We're Canadians, right? But let's not forget here, Trump has issued tariffs on over 90 countries. 90 countries that he increased tariffs or he put tariffs on that where no tariffs existed on some ridiculous ideas. Canada, 50%. Brazil has a 50% tariff on everything because they're jailing the guy, the former president there that tried to corrupt the last election. That guy that tried to corrupt the last U.S. elections back in the White House now. Go figure. But one of the countries, this is one, do you remember they had the big thing at the back of the White House there, and he had all these charts and trying to show that, this country here is going to get this countries. Two of the places that he referred to there, Hart Island and McDonald Islands. Now, these are way down in the South Pacific, about a 2-hour boat ride from Australia. He imposed tariffs on both of these places, on Hart Island and McDonald Island. There are no people on either one of those islands. There are penguins on those islands, yet he installed tariffs on those two places. I mean, that's just how weird and out there this guy is. That's who we're dealing with here. That's who's sitting across the table from us. Poilievre just doesn't seem to get it, or doesn't seem to want to understand that anyway. So he goes on with the letter. I want to get back to this too, because there's some interesting points here that need to be addressed. He goes on to say, no more losing. It's time for you to deliver the promised wins. And he got some bullet points here. So let's go over the bullet points. He says, get U.S. tariffs off Canadian softwood lumber, as Prime Minister Harper negotiated within 80 days of taking office. There have been more than doubled since you took office. Time for the promised win for suffering lumber workers, mills, and towns. Harper did have some success, but not under Donald Trump, of course. So when Harper took office back in 2006, it was a much different scenario and much different set of relations between Canada and the U.S. So let's put that in perspective. Second bullet point that Poilievre touches on here, he says, get U.S. tariffs off Canadian steel, aluminum, copper, and autos. Tariffs that have doubled since you took office. Time for your promised win to reverse the damage. Get rid of Buy American rules that discriminate against Canadian builders like you promised. And then the last bullet point is get rid of all other U.S. tariffs. Yeah, what a great idea. That's the whole purpose of the negotiations, Mr. Poilievre, to get rid of the tariffs. That was the job one. He says, well, there should be no tariffs. Good luck with that. Trump has said that he loves tariffs, that's going to be his policy. He says tariff is his favorite word in the English language. He doesn't know very many words, so this one's one of the favorite ones, so he's going to use it a lot. The chances of going zero tariffs, pretty slim, if not zero, okay? And anybody with any business sense understands that. People in the business community here understand that. You want the tariffs off softwood lumber? Of course we do. We sure want them off steel, aluminum, copper. Matter of fact, we're told that may be one of the major points of discussion with the meeting between Trump and Carney later today. But it's not going to happen overnight. And it's going to take an awful lot of work and diligence to simply say, well, that's going to be our point. We want zero tariffs. How is that going to be a negotiating point? Again, this is a guy who has no sense of business. He's never had a job outside of getting elected when he was just 21 years old, I guess, as an MP and a backbench MP. He's never had to meet a payday. He's never had to do anything. I did, by the way, previously say that he's never had a job in the public sector. Somebody told me he had a part-time job at Dairy Queen, I guess, when he was going to school. So I'm not sure if that qualifies him to be a negotiator for international trade deals, but be that as it might. But I also want to reference what he talked about here about get rid of the Buy American rules that discriminated against Canadian builders, like you promised. The Buy American policy, I did a little homework and research on this, which is something I don't think Mr. Poilievre is too keen on. He certainly doesn't show that he has anyway with some of the past things that he said and written. The Buy American policy goes back to 1933. This is not a Donald Trump idea. It's not a Joe Biden idea. It's not a Barack Obama idea. 1933, President Herbert Hoover instituted Buy American rules. And this was, by the way, as a result of pressure by William Randolph Hearst, the famous publisher who was raving racist, by the way. And his idea of Buy American was basically he didn't want anybody in other countries to benefit and didn't want them coming to America. Sounds an awful like the Trump administration, doesn't it? So that policy has always been in place since 1933, and it has always influenced Canada-U.S. trade. Now, past presidents have said, okay, there can be exemptions to this with the Auto Pact, of course, before the Canada-U.S. trade deals that have been in existence for the last little while. Instead of saying, okay, especially the auto trade, the auto sector, which I think is maybe the best example. Cars go back and forth 2, 3, 4 times before they're actually finished and ready to go to a showroom, over to Canada, over to Windsor, over to Oshawa, back to the States, over to Ohio, back and forth. So they said, look, it's silly to say that's a Canadian car and an American car. It's a combination of the two. Trump doesn't want to make that distinction, okay? We've tried. President Biden saw that. Obama saw that. Trump doesn't seem to want to do that. Therein lies the problem. But to suggest that this Buy American policy is going to go away is totally irrelevant and totally bizarre to suggest that's even going to be a factor. He finishes off the letter, says, we only expect you to keep your promises. If you only return with excuses, broken promises, and photo ops, you will have failed our workers, our business, and our country. He says, I'm always happy to help because we must put Canada ahead of our parties. Yeah, well, actions speak louder than words. He says, best wishes in Washington, Prime Minister. We are all cheering for a big win for Canada. What a cute little way to finish this. And by the way, this suggesting that he wants to be at the table, it was just a couple of months ago that he said that these negotiations are best done by the Prime Minister, not by other politicians from Parliament. I guess he's changed his tune. Maybe kind of sounds like maybe Mr. Poilievre now is trying to weasel in there to get a photo op with some of the U.S. leaders. Is that what you're doing here? You just want so badly to be at the table, but you don't belong at the table. And God help us here in Canada if you were at the table. And Prime Minister Carney's not doing this by himself. He's got partners. He meets regularly with the premiers of all the provinces because they are the elected representatives of those areas and they have a vested interest and they know best about those industries and the manufacturing and agricultural aspects in their particular province. He has a council of advisors, including Jean Charest, the former premier of Quebec, of course, and deputy leader of the Conservative Party at one point, and a number of business leaders. Those are the people that have knowledge of what's going on with the auto sector, with the lumber sector, et cetera, et cetera. They meet on a regular basis, too. So he's doing everything that needs to be done. The problem, Mr. Poilievre, just to clarify this for you, is not at this end. It's the guys across the table who simply don't seem to want to negotiate. And as we've talked about in the past, these quote-unquote deals that Trump is jumping up and down and saying, look what I got done. I got more deals than anybody else has done. There are no details about any of this stuff. What they've done is basically kind of agreed on a level of tariffs for some of these goods, whether it's 10, 15% or whatever. But when those world leaders are asked for details, they said, well, we don't really know. That we didn't promise to do much of anything. So it's really just a show here. That's a photo op for Trump. And what Carney is looking for is something substantive here. He wants help for the auto sector, for the aluminum steel sector, for the agricultural sector, not just a photo op, as Poilievre would intimate. That's not the case at all, and that's why there's no deal. And again, I want to refer back to the Spark survey that was released just a couple of days ago. The overwhelming majority, close to 78% of the people on that survey said, look, we don't want a deal. We don't want the fastest deal. We want the best deal for Canada. And they seem to think that, look, if it's going to take time, then fine, take the time. Because we don't want to get screwed around. We certainly don't want to have to go through the process of this again just a couple of months ago because, Trump is so whimsical. Goldie Heyer, we've talked about him in the past. Goldie is the president of the Business Council for Canada. And he says that, look, what we're looking for here is progress. He says nothing monumental because that's simply not going to happen. Mr. Heyer says maybe a carve-out here, an exemption there, a reduction there. You're going to do this incrementally. And he understands that. The folks in the auto industry understand that. And the other premiers seem to understand that, too. Some of them a little more bombastic, like Doug Ford, of course, with some of the things that they're saying. But they understand that this is a process. It's not going to happen. Carney's not going to walk out of there today, or nobody is going to walk out of the Oval Office and say, I got myself a deal and everything's covered and we're comfortable. It's a win-win situation. It's going to be a long, arduous process. And those are the things that are going on. But They understand that. Canadians seem to understand that. And I know there are a lot of concerns, and there are legitimate concerns about what's going on with the economy these days. But most Canadians, I think, are smart enough to understand where that's coming from, where the pressure is coming from. And the result of the negotiations is about the only way that we're going to be able to address this. You can't snap your fingers and say, hey, no more steel tariffs. Not going to happen. All right? And what it takes is somebody who's got some business savvy and understanding about international dealings. And, of course, Mr. Carney has a wealth of experience in that. So it's not going to happen. So, again, the whole thing, the whole concept of the letter from Poilievre is really just to jump up and down and say, hey, look at me, look at me. At no time in this letter and no time in the House of Commons during his rather acerbic comments and questions during question period has Poilievre in any way, shape, or form suggested a different tactic, something that he would do to try to move things along. Probably because he doesn't have any ideas, because he's had no experience in this at all. And all of a sudden now he's saying that he should be an advisor. Come to us for advice on this. From who? Who on the other side of the floor has the expertise that could deal with this? I can't think of any names, and certainly Mr. Poilievre is not one of those names. So therein lies the dilemma. Yeah, it sucks that things are the way that they are right now, but that's the guy in the White House. And his minions, the Bisserts and the Ludnicks and others that are doing his bidding for him, are the ones that we have to deal with here. It's an arduous task, but Canadians seem to understand that we've got the right team and the right Prime Minister doing Canada's bidding. And Poilievre just doesn't seem to get that. Goal one for Pierre Poilievre, since he won his by-election a couple of months ago now, has always been he still wants to be the Prime Minister. And he's bitter, obviously, that he lost his own seat. He's bitter that they didn't win the election. Don't forget, this guy had one of the most monumental falls in the history of Canadian politics. He had like a 24-point lead with only a few months before the federal election and lost that election. So there's a little bitterness going on here, and that seems to be his motivation and his drive. He's not looking for the best deal for Canada. He wants Carney to fail. He wants to be able to lambaste Carney in the House of Commons, and he wants to try to undermine Carney's creativity and certainly his abilities to try to get some sort of a deal here. That's goal one. He wants him to trip and fall, and it's not going to happen, and he's certainly not going to be reaching across the aisle. There are times in the past where these sorts of things have worked, where there has been cooperation, reaching across the aisle to the other side. And it's happened in Canadian politics. It's happened in U.S. politics. It's happening now with the premiers. There are some premiers there that are bitter rivals and have huge philosophical differences. Some of them have huge philosophical differences with the Prime Minister. Danielle Smith being one of them. I don't think she's ever going to be, sitting around saying kumbaya with Mark Carney, but there seems to be at least some common ground here and some commonality about where they want to go and some common goals. Poilievre doesn't share any of that. And he just shows that he has no sense of trying to create a team, to try to have some solidarity, to try to make this thing work, which I guess is just one more reason that Canadians have to understand that this is not the guy that you want to be leading the country right now. And of course, after poll shows that. Even though the Liberal support right now is waning because of the economy, and let's face it, no matter who the government is, if the economy starts tanking and if people start losing jobs, they're going to blame the government. That's what they typically do. But even now, those numbers are starting to narrow between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Gap between having Carney as a Prime Minister as opposed to Poilievre is still wide. They just don't like the guy and they don't trust him. And maybe that's the thing that bothers Poilievre more than anything else. So you can write all the letters that you want, Mr. Poilievre. Fact of the matter is we've got the right people in charge. But it's a very frustrating circumstance right now to know that, the guys across the aisle from right now are not looking at Canada's best interest. They're looking at their own political interests. And that's not how you build a team. And that's not how you win a success in these sorts of negotiations. We'll watch. In a future podcast, we'll talk about what the Prime Minister and the President said in their meeting at the White House today and the implications of that. More to come, as they say in our business. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. And by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, great to have you with us. Hit that notification bell for us and spread the word. Thank you to everybody for also subscribing. These are very tenuous times, very important times, and it's important that we have this dialogue, this back and forth about what's happening and how it's going to have an impact on your life and on ours as we go through this process. And by supporting us through your subscriptions, we can continue to do that work. So thank you for that. By the way, probably noticed we've altered the format for the podcast. We've done a few things differently that we haven't done previously on the podcast. Let us know what you think. I don't know that we're going to do this all the time, but sometimes the topic and the material that we're going to be presenting to you right now begs for this sort of a format, and we like it. We want to know how you feel, too. So in your comments, let us know what you think about this as well. Always looking for your input into what we're doing here on the podcast. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing the show today. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed. Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.